If you're watching this video and you're thinking, well, you have great independence in your fingers, I didn't develop that by doing what I call overholding exercises. I did not practice Hanen. I didn't practice these Czerny exercises. In this video, we're going to talk about the problem with finger independence exercises, and we're starting right now. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today's topic is finger independence exercises, and the way I see it, we have a bit of a problem. Many people have this experience where they do them a lot and feel like they don't really get any better. In fact, they feel like they stay the same, or even worse. Maybe they develop a certain feeling of weakness in the finger, which I know I did in the past, and I've heard this from a lot of people. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about with a commonly given solution to finger independence, to the problem of finger independence. And then I'm going to give you 4 reasons for why that solution that is typically given does not help. And then of course I'm going to give you what I think is the solution. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The advice that's typically given to a student or a person playing the piano to overcome this problem of finger independence is what I like to call overholding exercises, and combined with lifting the fingers really high. And I'll show you what I mean. So for instance, some sort of exercise where we play a bunch of notes together and hold them, and then lift fingers individually and play them like so. Or another example is playing 2 fingers, right? So let's say my thumb and my 3rd finger, and I would play up and down with the upper part of my hand and then hold my thumb like this sort of thing, okay? And then of course the opposite. I'm going to talk now about why those kind of exercises don't work. So first of all, the first reason is the anatomy of the hand and the fingers, okay? The fingers are not actually 100% able to be independent from each other, okay? Now, if you actually, I'm going to close the keyboard lid here. There we go, okay. And let's say I take my index finger and I press really, really hard with that finger, right? I press, like I would press down a key. And then I try to move my other fingers. What you'll notice is that there's a certain amount of tension, like my thumb starts kind of locking up, and it's really hard to move my other fingers around, okay? And that's because the way the hand and the fingers work is they're made to be used together in conjunction with each other. They're not really made to be used completely independently from each other, okay? Just like when you walk, no one thinks of that as an issue of foot or leg independence. They actually work codependently with each other. And the same thing is true with our fingers. I've discussed this in another video at length, but for instance, the 4th finger is incapable of being completely independent of the other fingers because of this piece of tissue that actually goes over the top of it and won't allow it to actually lift away from the hand without the other fingers, okay? However, if I lift 4 and 5 together, then 4 lifts just fine. This kind of gives us a clue as to how the anatomy, the natural makeup of the hands and the fingers won't allow them to be 100% independent. The thumb has a certain amount of independence. The index finger has a certain amount of independence. The 4th and 5th fingers don't really. And the middle finger has a certain amount of independence, but in a different way than some of the other fingers. That's the first point that I think is really important to understand, is that just the simple makeup of the hand, the anatomy of the hand, makes it so that not all the fingers are capable physically of becoming to the same equal amount of independent from each other. And some of them just naturally are already independent without really much work. The second thing is lifting the fingers. What I mentioned, what people typically tell you to do is to do those overholding exercises and lift the fingers really high, okay? Well, the problem is that, like I mentioned, the fingers don't really lift independently from each other super well, okay? And you can experience this. Okay, 5 probably does it pretty well. 4 does not. 3's pretty good. 2's pretty good. But what you'll notice is there's a certain amount of just tension that's naturally in the hand. But we can actually get around this by doing the opposite, okay? The fingers don't lift very independently, or certain ones that we want to become independent, but they all have the ability to drop independently. So for instance, if I have these fingers up like this, notice that I can drop the 4th finger just fine, completely independent of the other fingers. And I can do the same thing with my fourth finger. In fact, I can do that with any of those fingers just fine. So the point here is that the fingers don't lift independently super well, or all of them equally, if you will, but they all can drop independently from each other. And ultimately, the keys go down, they don't go up. So think about that for a second. Why do I have to lift my fingers really high? Because the keys are going down, they're not going up, and I don't actually need a large preparatory up and down motion when I play the piano. It's kind of wasted movement. The third problem with these exercises is most of the time it causes a student to really grip the keys, okay? So for instance, when we do this, a lot of times we'll really focus on that thumb and really grip with the thumb, and there's all this tension in my thumb, which is translated into the rest of my hand, and it's really difficult to move the fingers. Now the fourth reason is that it's not actually particularly musical. And what I mean by that is, of course, the aspect that those exercises are incredibly boring and dull and no one actually wants to do them. But also, music isn't really like that. Every piece of music where we have long notes and have to play shorter notes, there's a certain amount of give and take where we have a line to shape and we have, something that's getting louder or softer, which actually makes that much easier. It's much harder to say do this and make it perfectly even than it is to sort of change that sound. And you'll notice that my arm and my hand actually help me do that, and that's an important point. So now let's go ahead and talk about what I think is the solution to finger independence, or the problem of finger independence. So number one is don't grip the keys. You have to learn to use the weight of your arm to hold the note down. So for instance, these exercises can be played quite successfully, but what I'm doing here is I'm actually using the weight of my arm to hold that key down. So all my thumb is doing is supporting that weight, and it's just sitting there. I'm not gripping the keys. I'm able to kind of move really freely. And that's a very important point. That makes holding long notes while you play shorter notes in one hand much easier, because then my muscles aren't tied up. Remember we did that little exercise on the fall board, or the lid rather, where we press with one finger and try to move the other fingers, and notice how it just felt really awkward and tense and angular, okay? But if we actually just use the weight of our arm is just sitting there, it really doesn't take that much weight to put the key down, then the finger's not pressing. All these muscles and these tendons that control my fingers are not really tied up. They're just loose and able to freely move, and it allows everything else to freely move as well. Now, point number two rather, has to do with the fingers. And I already really alluded to this and kind of already spoiled this point, but that's that the fingers don't need to lift. They need to go down. So if I do this, notice that my fingers are not lifting particularly high because they don't need to. The fingers can drop very easily, in fact, very independently from each other, and that's really what they need to do, okay? Now, point number 3 here is we need to make sure that we shift our arm, and you can actually experience this with everyday things that we do, okay? Think about someone typing on a computer keyboard. What you'll notice is that they actually move their whole hand, and their whole hand is moving, and everything moves and works together. This is a concept of that we would refer to as alignment in piano, and that's that the arm needs to be aligned behind whatever finger is playing, okay? So for instance, if I play my thumb, my arm is here. But if I play my 5th finger, I want my arm to be here. So notice how there's this sort of shift over here. My elbow has actually changed position, okay? And what that's gonna help me do is that's going to help me really put all of my energy into that note there. So if I was to play this exercise, I'm gonna play an octave higher just so it's easier to see. But I want to make sure, see how my arm is shifting up and down like so. Now it doesn't mean that my arm is making these huge motions that are getting in the way of my fingers, which is why people typically say, oh, the arm needs to be quiet because people have too much arm motion. It doesn't actually have to be very much. It's only that much, okay? It doesn't have to be a lot of arm motion, but it needs to be there. And remember that example that I mentioned about typing on a keyboard, computer keyboard rather, or writing something by hand, or even just using your smartphone. Actually, notice that when people do that, they don't freeze the arms and then just do like this sort of a thing. Or when someone writes, they sort of move like this, and the arm and everything moves together. It's the same thing when we play the piano. Now, the final point here, or part of the solution, is using circular motion. Okay, now, and this is really the specific biggest point here, is that this sort of ties everything together. So it helps us to keep from gripping the keys, even if we have a certain amount of arm weight. It helps us to not need to lift the fingers too much or move the fingers more than we need to. And it helps sort of focus that movement in the arm. So for instance, if I do this, instead of just shifting up and down with my arm like so, what I can actually do is I can actually draw kind of like a circle with my arm. So notice how I'm going to go. So my wrist and my arm are moving up like this. And this is a really, really, really important point. I could show you examples in different pieces of repertoire for like literally an hour of how useful this sort of motion is when you have two different voices or lines in one hand with longer notes and shorter notes that are moving around. We can see the same thing in the left hand, okay? Okay, so you can see that my arm is moving. I'm making that sort of circular gesture. You can see that shifting motion moving, and you can see that my fingers don't really need to lift particularly high. So I think that this is ultimately the best solution to this problem of finger independence. If you're watching this video and you're thinking, well, you have great independence in your fingers, I didn't develop that by doing what I call overholding exercises. I did not practice Hanen, I didn't practice these Czerny exercises or whatever exercises. I actually just implemented these technical ideas with the help of a teacher naturally, and that's what truly helped me develop independence of fingers. I don't feel like my fourth finger is weak. I haven't felt that in a very long time, or my fifth finger, and I haven't thought, gee, I wish my fingers were more independent, because applying these technical solutions truly are the key to unlocking finger independence. So I hope you guys found this information useful and informative. If you have any questions, put those in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.